Hi everyone, welcome to day 9 of the Open to Love free online festival. And we have an amazing guest with us today. It is such a treat to have the incredible author and therapist, Jeremiah Abrams, on. Thank you so much, Jeremiah, for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Ronnie.
Yeah, I'm so blessed to have you here, Jeremiah, because you've had decades and decades of experience, you know, as a Jungian therapist, a dream analyst, an author, and more. And also you've been teaching on this exact topic of opening your heart to love in workshops for at least the last decade or so. And also this topic of meeting your shadow. You're an absolute expert in this field. Your book, exactly called that, Meeting the Shadow, has really encompassed a huge amount of work on this topic.
Well, you know, I made that book 30 years ago. Can you believe it? And I'm still getting royalty checks. It's still a popular classic book. But
more so now than ever, I would say. You know, there's this beautiful awakening in the community where we know we do need to look at our shadow in order to evolve and to grow.
Well, it seems to be the essential act of, especially once you hit midlife, you realize it. So it's a very important time right now for each of us to individuate, and you can't really work on yourself, inner and outer, without accounting for the shadow. So I think today I'd like to give people just a quick view of what the shadow is, where the concept came from, and how it works in our lives. And how it affects our relationships. I think to me, the barriers to relationship are within us, and they're there because of our experience and conclusions we've drawn.
That's so apt, Jeremiah, when you put it like that. The barriers are within us.
I've over the years, I was attracted to working with the love problem because I saw it was so intimately tied up with our shadows.
Right.
That you know, we go looking for love, but really what we have to deal with are the reasons that we're blocked to really allow ourselves to feel that deep connection with others and to receive. And it's a spiritual problem as well for us, the shadow. And it's ripe. I think, you know, I did a whole section in my book on just what happens at midlife in regard to the shadow. It's probably the best section of the book. You begin to realize that there's more in terms of your inner life. And Jung coined the word individuate to mean becoming more of who you are. And so much of our shadow is unconscious to us. So it's about becoming more aware of the ways. And it isn't getting rid of it, it's embracing it, it's integrating these qualities that we've rejected. In innocence, it's just to survive. Well, I'll speak more about that, the evolution of the shadow. Do we get a picture in this medium of who's online, or when it's good
let me have a look.
Begin?
Yeah, we can jump right in. Let me see who we've got watching, if I can find my way there. 1 second. I'm getting there.
Can people hop on and ask questions easily?
Yes, so whoever we got watching, we've got a few people watching, and yeah, Miss Rosen is watching, and a couple of other people, but I can't see their names. Yeah, so go ahead, Mish, or anyone else who's watching, and add a question for Jeremiah on this beautiful topic. Oh, now I've got the replay happening. Jeremiah, and just to touch on something that you mentioned before about that the blockages to love, or let's say barriers to love, are all just perceived from within the own constructs of our own mind as a result of navigating childhood and being this species that is, of course, trying to survive, and a lot of it comes back to acceptance and to not wanting to be cast out of the village, right? So a lot of this stuff is quite primal, that drives some of these behaviors.
Well, the idea of self-love is at the center of it, you know, that we can be inauthentic because we've made an adaptation. But ultimately, this is the work for us to become more authentic and show up and allow others to see us and care about us. You know, this is the essential love problem. I would put it in spiritual terms. I think Rumi said it best. So I would quote Rumi, who said, you don't have to go out and seek love. You have to merely become aware and remove the barriers you've made against it. So this is a big umbrella in the shadow. It's but it accounts for the love problem primarily, and it's in love that we actually realize more of who we are. So it's love can be the healing factor. So just being open to love is the start, you know, where you allow others to perceive and care about you, and you become aware of your hesitancies and where they came from. Yeah. And a lot of it's conditioned by, you know, our ego personality has tried to figure out what's acceptable, you know, and this is how the shadow gets formed, is that we have an ego ideal, and what doesn't fit it, we reject it. So it becomes shadow in our personality.
And Jeremiah, oh, sorry, carry on. I'll ask in a sec.
Many people think the idea is to get rid of the shadow, and no, the idea is to embrace it, to find ways to integrate those qualities that maybe your true gifts are buried in the shadow because you made the mistake, let's say, of disidentifying with those qualities. So.
And from the framework of self-love, if self-love is really the key to finding love outside of ourselves, obviously we first need to love ourselves and believe in our lovability in order to be a match for someone to love us and for us to receive that. If self-love is a precursor to finding that external love, then what is the role of doing shadow work there? Because in shadow work, we're bringing back these disowned parts of ourselves and becoming whole, right? I'd love to hear you speak into that.
Okay. Well, I think the challenge for most of us is to accept what's in the shadow. Even if we find it abhorrent, we've developed certain beliefs. The mind is tricking you. You know, we live a very dualistic sort of existence where we reject certain things as bad and certain things as good. We have to trust that the things that are antisocial or primitive behaviors, we have the capacity to not let them affect our relationship with others, but we have to actually allow all of us to be present with others. And, you know, others can see our shadow much easier than we can. That's the problem with the shadow, is that everyone else sees it and can love it, but we can't. So that's where self-love is really essential, is that if we can accept it, then others can, and they don't have to make a big deal out of things that you've judged in the past. The high moral effort that's required is to just accept the shadow, to embrace it, not to act it out. It's such a core piece of work in terms of becoming whole. This is the key. Not just to Jung's psychology, but Jung, that was Jung's gift to us. He gave us a language to talk about the phenomena. But it's the key to actually working on yourself, is accepting these rejected parts. In the here and now, to be able to show up and be authentic requires that you not be in judgment of those qualities, but you love those qualities. In fact, many people have their finest gifts trapped in the shadow because they grew up in a household that didn't value those qualities. And this is the confusing part, is that we've integrated what I like to call the ego ideal. What we've integrated into our ego ideal may be bullshit, you know, maybe just what was in the environment and conditioned in us. So we have to do the self-examination. Now, it doesn't just happen at midlife, but by midlife, you must do it. This is where it becomes imperative. So I would like to speak to everyone. Midlife isn't after the age of 40. You can have midlife when you're 20. And in fact, it's essential that you take this on, so not wait. Mostly the way one becomes aware of the shadow is through the reaction of others and how it impacts on others. It's also through the dreaming. The shadow is a prominent figure that comes up in the dreams. When you enter, let's say you go into therapy, you're going to actually stimulate shadow production in the therapeutic process. Now,
it always gets worse. And you're stirring the pot, all the shit rises to the surface, right?
Yeah, I mean, we may be projected onto others, because that's the way we deal with the shadow, is we project it and we attribute it to qualities in others, but it's really about recovering those projections and realizing, oh, that's really me. And the healing part of integrating the shadow is not a formula. It's not it's an ongoing process. It doesn't end. There's not an end point where you've accomplished the fact. It's a process of ongoing self-discovery and integration. And the reason I did Meeting the Shadow as a compendium was I found there's a lot of ways to understand the shadow, not just through Jungian psychology. Jung gifted us with the language to talk about it. And I like his model of psychology best. He talks about individuating, becoming the person you really are. And without integration of the shadow, that's impossible to happen. It's like you can't be whole without accounting for it.
Exactly.
And rather than just intellectualize it, it's a source of a lot of pain in our lives. So better to look at it as the places where you're suffering, as you'll realize the shadow, not just having a nice, comfortable concept of it. My work as a therapist is continually dealing with people's suffering, and what we liberate from becoming more conscious of the suffering is those elements of the shadow that are stubborn and stubbornly buried in us. And a simple definition of the shadow is the person you'd rather not be. That was when, at the end of Jung's life, he came to that simplicity as well. And that you have to kind of that's where the self-love concept is not just a concept, it's practical. It reduces our suffering. It enables us to be more available for the flow of love with others, not just one way of loving others, but allowing yourself to be loved and seen. So this question of authenticity looms large for us. The longer we're carrying ourselves in life, the more authentic is the demand of life, not to be living a false life.
So interesting, when you're talking about like loving these aspects of ourselves that we would rather, let's say not acknowledge. When we talk about the blocks that we have internally to love, if we can't perceive ourselves as being lovable, if we have a certain characteristic or have done a certain thing, then how can we ever receive that? Even if the love is right there being poured upon us, we'll never actually be able to catch it. It'll just like go straight past us because we can't grasp it if we can't believe it to be true.
Yes. The work is actually confronting your beliefs about yourself and about how a good person should be. Like I call it the ego ideal. That's where we start, is just confronting the beliefs we have about ourselves and our lovability. Let's say self-love is the essential act, and removing those barriers. Those are an essential part of the barrier. It's a spiritual problem, really, because it keeps us from finding meaning in life. And ultimately, the target dimension in life isn't just locating someone to love us, but it's actually generating meaning. of your existence, from your existence, and self-love is an essential ingredient of that. A lot of these concepts do reduce things terribly, so I don't want to be overly simplistic, but
yeah,
when we're talking about love, we have to talk about self-love. We have to talk about our availability to be cared about.
Okay, let's go deeper into this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this part of it, Jeremiah.
Well, I think we have to examine where a lot of those beliefs came from. Eventually, they'll become clear if you are in the presence of your beliefs and paying attention. There's a lot. It's like mining. You will find a gold mine of the sources, and seeing where you drew these conclusions and developed these beliefs is part of our history. Depending on the circumstance of our family of origin, what culturally influenced us. Now these days, children are exposed to so much through the media, through just being available to the world, that they draw conclusions without parental guidance. So it's even more complicated. But in other words, what's worthy about a person can often be established by a pop idol more than a parent, and it makes the parental task different. It's not your job to formulate in your child's psyche the authenticity. You have to let them go and figure things out. It's about equipping them with the discernment to see what is worthy behavior, what's worthy about their own being. Of course, as a parent, your own love of your children is the best tool you have. Loving your children for who they express and who they are as they are is the right message. That's where the work is as a parent. And most of us as parents are critical of the job we've done. We look at our children and think we screwed up. No, we can't take full responsibility for what happens to our children. They're exposed to so much at an early age. The imprints in life really feed their own belief or lack of belief in themselves. A lot of the disorders we see in young people have to do with the confusion about whether they're worthwhile,
right.
whether we put them in categories and see how they're doing self-harm or judge them as pathological in some way. We can't be responsible for what happens to our children. They're exposed to so many influences. And these days we live in an age of narcissism. It's not, it's a word that gets bandied around a lot, but it's a result of some of the faulty parenting that does happen. But the narcissistic problem is epidemic in our time. Every age has its problems. This is the one that we're all living with. And a lot of people bandy that language around because they find fault in somebody when they get rejected in a relationship and just put the wrong label on them, call them narcissistic. Well, we all have a narcissistic edge to us. That's also part of the shadow, being able to see how that self-involvement it's so oversimplified in the language, but it has to do with not accepting ourselves.
Right.
And so the narcissist basically forms a false self to be acceptable. And that's what narcissism really is. And
okay,
if we're,
gotcha.
Yeah. And if we're lacking love for ourselves, it's because we're loving this false self we've constructed to become more acceptable. And it's a tautology. It's the wrong use of the language. By the way, I would recommend, if people want to answer good answers to the questions about narcissism, read Alice Miller, German writer. She's gone now, but she wrote a book I think in the 60s. No, it came out in the 90s. Trying to remember her. It had a couple of titles. But the most brilliant work on narcissism, Alice Miller.
What was her name again?
Her later
Alice
books,
Miller.
yeah. Her later books are not nearly as good.
Mm-hmm.
It's something like The Promise of the Gifted Child, something like that, subtitle.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, I'm just having a look at her. Yeah, The Drama of the Gifted Child, how
mhm.
narcissistic parents form and deform the emotional lives of their talented children. Yeah, the
Yeah.
drama of the gifted child. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now it's also helpful in terms of guiding your own parenting, but it's more about realizing the ways in which you yourself have created a false self to be lovable,
Right.
and this directly relates to the love problem. And when I think about self-love, I think we have to call it a problem. That
Mm-hmm.
there's a confusion that we had about what is lovable. Who do we
Right.
have to be to get love?
And
And
that's
this
how
is
this
the
narcissism has developed. Okay, that's so
Mhm.
interesting. Wow. And that's why it's so prevalent right now, more than like even 10 years ago.
Most people focus on it as an extreme pathology, like President Trump or someone like that, extreme
Mm-hmm.
narcissist. Uh, it's more of a pathology that affects our personal lives, and we have to identify with the fact that we do have a narcissistic wound. Most of us. We live in an age that's highly narcissistic, and that language is more precise than it's being used. Mostly we hear about it as people criticizing the fault in their partners, and they were
Mm-hmm.
too narcissistic. Well, projection is part of the shadow. We will project onto others what we haven't come to terms with in ourselves. So I think it's important that we own our own narcissistic wounds, even if we had great parenting, even if our
Mm-hmm.
parents were great. These days we're being parented by the culture as much as by individuals. And I think it's important to recognize that there's so many influences coming in through the media. I don't want to feel critical about the way that happens. It just happens. It's the beliefs that we develop about ourselves, about what kind of body we should have, about what kind of behavior we should have, comes as much from the collective as it does from individual parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And blame is a disease itself. So I don't believe in blaming parents. I will say they should have done better,
Mm-hmm.
but it's too easy an out, and it's not really helpful as a therapist to join a client in blaming their parents.
Mm-hmm.
They did
Yeah, because
screw
that's
up, but
something that's outside of your hands anyway. That set of circumstances is there. Blaming doesn't help actually, but when we put the focus back on ourselves, we can at least deal with our side of the equation, especially as an adult, and we're looking
exactly.
at childhood trauma
We want to
or
support
complaints.
people to
Yeah.
take self-responsibility. It's really uh, so many people are stuck in these childhood wounds that they're still blaming their parents. Now, I'm not simplistic. I don't just say get over it, but we have to go there and look at what kind of construction they've developed to not take responsibility. That's what you got. You have to be responsible for it and make it into something worthwhile. And there is a dark side to the narcissism, but at the heart of narcissism is an attempt to love oneself. Unfortunately, we identify with a false belief about who we are. And this is where the conundrum of self-love really is a narcissistic problem. The narcissist develops this false self to survive because they're not getting love for just being themselves. So ultimately, that's the challenge, to love yourself as you are, not the false self you've developed. And this is what you have to wake up to, that you are loving this picture of yourself that you've created. A persona that's not actually who you are. And that's not what you're going to find. If you're open to love, you're going to be looking for others to love that false self. It's not going to work.
Right.
That's why the shadow work is so important, that you come to
Okay.
terms with that false self.
And so how does meeting the shadow and all aspects of your own parts that you have tried to, let's say, or you've been taught to reject through your upbringing and society, etc., how does meeting that shadow impact our openness to love?
Well, if you stay with the simple definition I gave you of the shadow being the person you'd rather not be, then finding a way to embrace and embody those qualities, embracing the shadow allows you to love yourself a lot more. You'll feel a lot better. You know, it's not like you have to become the antisocial elements of the shadow or the distasteful parts. You have enough moral discrimination and discernment that you won't necessarily have to act them out because you accept them. Acceptance doesn't mean putting it into action. It means loving those qualities, loving your imperfection. You know, we have this idea that, you know, in the world we live in, we have to live up to some perfectionistic ideal that we've developed. No, that's just an ideal like the ego ideal. You know, you have to be who you are, humbly accept those parts. And a lot of those parts in us have been humiliated or embarrassed by others. And a lot of the energy is being able to feel through at an emotional level, pass through the humiliation or shame that we've been made to feel by the interaction with the world. So these are impediments. I think that emotionally we have to open to accepting the shadow in spite of the shame we may carry. That's how a lot of elements get relegated to the shadow or to the unconscious, is through shame. Shame is the master emotion, if you look at it that way. I mean, as a therapist, I've had to learn this from experience, but you can learn it from your own experience, that it's such a powerful kind of emotion.
Very motivating, right?
It's the part that doesn't want to be seen. That's what shame is about. So that it's such a big part of the shadow. You know, dealing with severely disturbed people, we've discovered that converting the shame to guilt is a lot easier. You convert it to feeling guilty about being those ways, you can do something about it. Shame wants to be hidden. So that's a secret from psychiatry, really. Learning how to do that conversion. If it stays at shame, it will remain shadowy.
And Jeremiah, we were talking a couple of sentences ago about loving these aspects of ourselves. How do we do that in a real way? Like, how does that come about? Like, let's say you're in relationship and something comes up, this part of you, like, how can we do that on a practical level? Is that by, let's say, curiosity or playfulness, or in which ways can you direct us in a practical way so that we can do this shadow work on a day-to-day basis as stuff comes up?
I devoted several chapters in meeting the shadow and practically and how to do it. But I mean, ultimately, you live life fully, it's going to come up automatically. You just have to discern when the shadow is present. If you don't, it'll come up in your dreaming. In other words, if it's unconscious, something's going on in your life that's causing you a disturbance, it's going to inhabit your dreams. You'll see it there. It'll often come up in your dreaming as a same-sexed, oppositely complected being. Things show up in your dreaming. Now, not everyone remembers their dreams. Everyone does dream, but I have found as an analyst that that's the most direct way to help people is by studying your dreams, seeing what's coming up there in response to your life experience. But there are many ways. The shadow will occur in your life. You'll have doubt. I'm trying to remember some of the key phrases that I've used in the book. Marie-Louise von Franz, a writer who I really respect, she says, if you have an experience and then draw a conclusion, then you immediately have doubt about that conclusion, it's more likely that there's shadow involved. You know? So you begin to be more suspicious of your own mental process of judgment. There's certain obvious things that we do that we're not proud of. Making amends is a very healthy thing to learn how to do. Not just be walking through life as an apologist, but taking responsibility, self-responsibility. I say radical self-responsibility for your actions, for your actions with others, for your enactments. Ultimately, the shadow is, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous in our lives. It's going to come up and confront us. Just having a language to say, oh, that piece I'm embarrassed by and I don't want people to see is shadow. That is part of my shadow. I have to learn how to, I don't have to love it in the sense of accepting the behavior, but I have to love it in terms of accepting it. Yeah. So there are a lot of bywords. That's why I did a book, because I thought, oh my gosh, this is complicated. And I came at it from every angle in this book. It's a compendium of advice. Actually, I think I told you I did this book 30 years ago and it's still selling well. It's a classic in terms of how to deal with the shadow. The way I deal with it practically is I give workshops. I often, in the workshops, one way that we help each other confront our shadow is there'll be toward the end of the workshop, we'll do an evening where I'll ask people to masquerade as their shadow, to show up as your shadow and present it to others.
God. Wow.
And then eventually we turn the music up and we dance with each other's shadow, but it's quite liberating.
It's beautiful. Like, even hearing you say that idea made me immediately start to like think, no, like there's always that aspect that does want to stay hidden,
You'll take some element of the shadow that's obvious to you and you embody it, and you present it to others in a social way and allow other people to accept it. The primary way that we get to experience our shadow is through the eyes of others.
Right.
It's a well-known secret. The emperor has no clothes, but other people won't necessarily tell him to put his clothes on. Other people can see our shadow much more clearly than we can, because we're the one who carries the judgment and the shame about those qualities. So at a practical level, this is the way in an intimate relationship it's going to come up, because it'll piss off your partner or it'll trouble them. And taking ownership in the presence of someone who cares about you is the best way. Yeah.
And Jeremiah, in what ways have you seen, in all of your thousands of people that you've worked with, what are the types of shadow, let's say, issues that come up that are such a block when it comes to love and relationships and lack of connection?
Well, it's hard to generalize. I mean, most people have a low self-esteem or a low self-regard, so it's going to be a barrier in that way. All of the conclusions we've drawn about our unlovability can be a barrier to love. Also, our extreme judgment of others, first of all, dealing with the unfinished creature in the person you love. After you fall in love, gone through the phases of a love relationship, you're faced with an unfinished person. You have to kind of accept them the way they are. And the challenge is accepting the other and all their qualities and their deficits. You can negotiate ways that you do love, because love involves a way of living, living with someone. And I would say in a relationship, the important task, if you look at relationships that work, is making the other person a number one priority in your life. And that means accepting them the way they are, confronting them about the things that you find in an objective way are unacceptable, to help them, not to judge them, to support their individuation, their becoming more clearly who they are. Yeah. So in a love relationship, I think of as a constructive platform that we all have, we all need. I haven't been in an intimate relationship the past couple of years, but that is the quality that we want most from our partner, someone who will be real with us, who will accept us even for our imperfections. And like I said, it's each of us is an unfinished creature. We're not talking about perfection here. We're not looking for the ultimate. We wouldn't need others. And we're not looking for ultimate enlightenment. The shadow enables us to be human. It's a very human quality. No one is free of the duality of a human personality. We all have shadows. Everyone has a shadow. Even saints have shadows. Think about it that way. It's true. Even the holiest human being hasn't reached a place without a shadow. And I think it's important to not compare yourself to saints. Although if you do a study of the lives of saints, you know, Mother Teresa was supposed to be hell on wheels to be around. She was a mean bitch.
I've heard that.
Gandhi treated his niece in a very unacceptable way. He was difficult too in his own private way. We can't project onto others perfection and assume that that's who we have to be. Certainly working on yourself in, let's say, a therapeutic environment where you have a partnership with a therapist is the ultimate best way. I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years of my life. My clients get better. I don't take account for that. They are working on themselves. I'm there to accompany them, you know. These days, when people ask me what I do is I sit with people. That's what a good therapist does. Listening,
you do
observing.
that. You do that. You're right. That's a good way to put it. You've helped me immensely and so many people that I know in Bali, and also you have clients indeed around the world. So you are so incredible at what you do. Yeah.
There's an art to doing that with people.
Yeah.
You know, it's not by the book.
Being there.
You leave all the ideas outside the door of the consulting room and you just be present, you know. And so in terms of shadow healing, certainly someone who you're working with, not because you're paying them, they're there to accept you and find ways that you can accept yourself. Like I said, I don't like reductive ideas, but that's essentially what goes on in a therapeutic relationship. It's a partnership.
And Jeremiah, do you notice that that when you are working with couples and helping them on their journey, coming back now to this concept of self-love and parts of ourselves that we reject, do you often sense that the part of their partner that they deem unacceptable is linked to parts of themselves that they are deeming unacceptable?
Well, it's a very complicated affair. Okay, a relationship has probably four parties to it. It's the conscious ego personalities interacting. There's the shadow of those two people, which will be activated. If one person is damaged and hasn't found a way to love themselves, it's going to pollute and corrupt the relationship. And the other person will be completely frustrated because they can't win. Their love is going to be defeated. So it's a very complex affair. Both parties bring to the table their own projections, their own beliefs, and you have to sort through. So relationship is a place to sort through all of the psychological material that both people bring. So, like, and every situation system, is
a beautiful, painful filtration system of coming back to self.
Now, I'm not. My self-interest isn't involved with a couple in terms of it's not going to hurt me. I'm just observing and helping them both become aware of the factors that are contributing to their lack of compatibility. The way that, you know, a relationship should be thought of as a series of agreements between two personalities. You make thousands of agreements with each other, and some of those agreements are corrupted by each other's shadow, you know, that, you know, or you make an agreement, you don't keep it over and over again. Or you have an addiction that is a kind of a lie as well, because you're not being clear with yourself or others. Whatever the factor is, the agreements have to be maintained. That's why I say the most important thing is to make the other person your number one priority, and being authentic and keeping your agreements is what that's about. Not changing your how you look or how you behave, but just keeping your agreements and your integrity with the other person. A relationship is a laboratory where you're working on this with another person. You know? And a lot of people want it to be instantaneous and natural. Well, you have to work on yourself for it to be natural, for the flow to be there. And for some people, you look at other relationships with envy because they seem to have worked it out. Well, it's hard to judge. Every situation is different. Everyone's quality of each personality is different. When you see a relationship that works, there are certain principles that you'll see work. And number one is they've made each other the priority in their lives. I'm not saying to the exclusion of caring about others, but this is where integrity matters. There are, it's interesting. I knew this couple who do couples therapy, and they tried writing books about it. I helped them start writing and get their publisher. And they did a study of, they asked everyone in their lives to send them relationships that they believed were working, and then they interviewed those people who were referred to them. And they derived certain principles about what a healthy relationship looks like based on couples at work. Well, I disregard generalizations largely because I don't really think it's scientific to generalize, but I think their primary top of their list was about making the other person the priority.
Right.
Yeah. That's why these relationships worked. And I don't really recommend those kinds of books myself. There's a lot of projection involved. So,
okay, yeah. And so Jeremiah, bringing this all back full circle, what would you say are the key components to you in opening oneself to love? Of course, self-love is part of that. When I say to love, I just mean to giving and to receiving.
Well, I mean, one has to develop a certain amount of courage to take the risks that love requires. Every love relationship is different. The risks are there. It's exposing yourself. It's actually committing to the well-being of another human being. So I think being in service to others is a very important part of love. Loving others means that you're willing to go the length, whatever it takes. The barriers are less obvious. They're personal. It depends on what your experience has been, but love teaches us how to love. If you're there and you're conscious and you're watching it, you'll get the signals about what's required to actually show up for that other person. And it involves, self-love is not secondary, it's involved. It's having your own self-regard allows you to see what is essential in terms of showing up for another being. And also the receptive principle is very important in love. You don't want to just be a giver. A lot of people hide in their relationships by giving, smothering the other person. No, it has to be reciprocal and balanced. It always is. I think the geometry of relationships is balance. I should say the arithmetic should be balanced.
Yeah.
The equation should work. And if there's imbalance, you need to examine what's going on, what's corrupting it. And sometimes you need outside help because you can't see it yourself. You can't see your own shadow and you can't see what's going on. So I'm not advertising psychotherapy. There's a reason it exists, though, is that other person can often see the dynamic. And reading and working on yourself is helpful. There are some excellent writers on relationship. There's a couple in Washington, in the US, I'm trying to remember their name. I've written about, they can predict if a relationship is going to succeed just by interviewing two people.
Wow.
Do you remember
Is it Gottman?
The Bormans?
Gottman, is it,
yes.
Is it the Gottmans? Yeah.
The Gottmans. Brilliant book, by the way.
I think you told me about, you recommended this to me years ago.
Probably I did.
When we worked together. Yeah.
I've been taking some medication. I think it's hurting my memory.
Me too.
Yeah. The Gottmans had a formula. They saw, what elements are required, and if they're not there, they'd interview a couple for 15 minutes and tell the couple whether it was going to work to be together and what wasn't working. But again, I'm so distrustful of generalizing about this, because every individual is different, every relationship is different. You have to use the personal formula yourself, use your own personal formula, see what works for you. You can be in a marriage. I've been married twice in my life. You can be in a marriage and it runs out of steam. You know, people grow apart. These days, having multiple intimate relationships is not only possible, it's necessary. You know, it's a complicated life we're living with lots of vectors, and people do change. Let's hope they change. Sometimes the change means the compatibility factor diminishes. You know, now of course, a love for life. You know, when we say till death do us part, that's an ideal. I think you want to go in and make commitment of that kind with a person. You know, it's required. Commitment to the relationship, to another person, to love, is required at that level, till death do us part. Sometimes it doesn't work.
Okay, but it's necessary to have that initial impetus. You're seeing that as an absolute key, yeah, despite the fact that you're also recognizing that as a human being, as a species, as another organism on this planet, our tendency is to have multiple relationships, right? Okay, that's so interesting.
I think that strength of that kind of commitment is required.
Wow.
Even if you fail, and
right,
you know, these days it's the percentage is going against you, but even
that
if you
makes
fail,
a lot of sense.
requires, and what does a commitment mean? It means that you're going to show up and actually keep your agreements, be the person the other person thinks you are, and if they don't, you're going to work on yourself. Yeah, or not, you know.
Yeah. Yes.
We have such an aversion to failure. There's a lot of failure in relationship, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You know, my basic understanding of the human cycle is that we're driven toward coupling. We're driven toward relationship. There's a very strong drive in us, and if it fails, we need to actually find a way to reconstitute ourselves and continue. You know? I'm not talking about sex, although that's one of the factors that's involved, but I'm talking about that drive toward intimacy is instinctual. You know,
absolutely.
We need the other to work on ourselves, you know, to see ourselves more clearly. And this is an important factor about the shadow that I don't emphasize, is that its invisibility to us requires another person perceiving it and holding up the mirror. That happens in intimate relationship. Sometimes it leads to the failure of the relationship, but it doesn't have to.
Right.
Our commitment to actually working on ourselves is part of that commitment to being with the other. Yeah.
That's so beautiful when you put it like that, Jeremiah.
And you know, I see we all want to have love succeed. You know, it's the finest thing in life. It may be the force that works in the universe. If you look at love in its broadest definition, is acceptance. Yeah. Not surrender, but accepting what is. And it has a component. Self-love has a spiritual component in this sense. You know, that we accept ourselves, we learn how to accept what is. It's a practice like meditation. In fact, most people, when they work on themselves in that way, let's say become meditators, become aware that this is the important ingredient in interacting with others. I'm eschewing the idea of generalizing too much, because every personality has their own personal formula. But you know, I in my workshops about the love problem, which I had various titles for, removing the barriers to love, whatever. I like to work off of the poet Rumi had a lot to say about love, and his best guidance was don't go out seeking it. Don't go seeking love. Discover the barriers within yourself through the love relationship, he was implying that you'll see them through the love relationship, through the pursuit of love, and dissolve those barriers that you've erected just to create your sense of safety in the world. You don't have to have a causal relationship with those barriers, but they're unnecessary. We created them so we could feel safe. And safety is a big factor in love relationship. You want to feel safe.
Yes.
But not by means of blocking the love. That's the misfortune, is that our blocks, our barriers can prevent us from feeling safe with the other because we're not being fully present. So I don't put people on pedestals about love, though. You have to discover what works. And with that particular individual that you want to have a relationship with. Relationship is a whole other thing apart from love. It's constructing a container between two personalities for love to exist and make it a priority. So, and that includes, if you have children, how the two of you engage in the loving action of parenting, which circles back to what we talked about earlier. The narcissistic family is not a healthy source of love. The narcissistic parent doesn't love the child for who they are, but rather for who they could be. You don't have to read far. I mentioned Alice Miller because she's the best. It's a short read. I wonder if there's anyone on that has questions for us in the dialogue we're having.
Yes. Well, Mish said she loves her shadow. It was there to protect her. So maybe we can talk into our shadows as a form of self-protection.
Well, shadow formation is a very simple affair. It's we start having a shadow right from the beginning. When we come into consciousness at 2 or 2.5, we're formulating an ego ideal that protects us. This is how to be best. And we reject, unfortunately, when we're young and immature, we reject what doesn't fit the ego ideal. The ego ideal itself is not in and of itself a bad thing. It does protect you. But some of the judgments we've made about certain ways of being are immature. They're not based on reality or experience. So as we mature into life, we realize that a lot of those conclusions that we drew were based on an incomplete perception of life. We haven't had enough
conclusions
experience.
of a 6-year-old. Do we want to be living our life in our 40s by the conclusion of the 6-year-old that, let's say, sexuality isn't safe, which for a 6-year-old it's not, but
Right.
for a
Exactly.
46-year-old it's probably something you do want to have in your life.
Exactly.
So we outgrow these conclusions.
Well, this is what the shadow work is. It's like removing the judgments that we made when we weren't fully experienced and mature. So it's a dynamic process. Like I said, shadow work goes on for a whole life. You don't reach the epitome of yourself. Although the objective
layers,
is you're perfecting your ability to be in life. That's what you're doing by doing shadow work. And it does require some humor, by the way. I want to mention that in the epilogue, I think I wrote this to you, Ronnie. In the epilogue to Meeting the Shadow, I said, comedians are shadow meisters.
That's true.
They're showing us our shadow and helping us laugh at it. And it's an essential part of doing work on your own shadow and accepting it is being able to laugh at yourself. Don't take yourself so seriously, which the shadow is like dead serious, would rather die than expose that part of yourself. No, it requires humor, our ability to laugh.
Yes.
And in the best relationships, there's a lot of laughter going. And we're laughing at ourselves as much as anything. I don't want to do relationship counseling, but there is the possibility that that process between two people is I don't want to call it enlightening, but it's going to shed light on the unfinished business in your psyche. And you might have to go do something about it, you know, either apart from the relationship, outside of the relationship, or in the dialogue you're having in the relationship. Since relationship is about agreements, about how you do life, it might come up that you need better agreements that account for some shadowy behaviors that you're enacting or the partner's enacting, and you're helping each other that way become perfecting, not to become perfect, but perfecting their ability to be engaged intimately, with another personality.
And
So,
agreements are key, actually, in your work. I'm remembering that now. And actually, when we first jumped on, we started talking about agreements. This is one of the things in which you really bring to the table is just that beautiful container, like not managing, because that makes it sound contrived, but let's say creating a beautiful container, which in this case is an agreement or a set of agreements in which the couple can then move through life's tumultuous waves.
Right. I mean, it's like weaving a fabric. The agreements between two people are very complicated, and a lot of them are implied. It's better if they're explicit, though.
That's true. They are implied, and probably that's where we get into a lot of trouble. Yeah.
We make assumptions about everything in life. You know, this is the duality of the mind is trying to do the short take on everything. You know, let's do this fast. I'll assume until I'm corrected.
Yes.
Well, in an intimate relationship, the correction is important. The conflict is inherent in relationship. It breeds intimacy because you're actually confronting assumptions that the other makes of you or you make of the other. Being conflict averse is not a healthy quality in relationship.
Yeah, that's not going to get you very far at all.
Seeking resolution to conflicts is the challenge between two people, and there's no relationship that isn't got conflict in it. You know, that's why we should be careful of envying other relationships, because we don't see what goes on in private. You know, between two personalities.
Or the parts of the shadow that you do need to accept about your partner, at least to hold that space between the two of you, if you are to agree to have an ongoing relationship together.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
How are we doing on time? Let's see.
So, well, we've been going for a whole hour now, and I feel like we have gotten so many beautiful, wise tidbits or things that we can actually take away. Thank you so much, Jeremiah. I really appreciate your perspective on things, especially that reminder about agreements. You know, that's something that I hadn't really thought about so much, but I'm glad that we spoke about it. And because I've actually learned so much again, or even been refreshed, because I haven't had a session with you for ages now. So, you know, to hear you speak again about agreements, that's a really good reminder for me to think about my interactions and, you know, the container of my relationships as a set of agreements. And
well, it's a function of love. If you want the love to prosper, you make better agreements with each other.
And the prioritization, like you said.
Probably I should tell people that if they're interested in the shadow, there's now an e-edition of my book on Amazon. You know, an electronic, you can download the book, Meeting the Shadow.
But Jeremiah, can you put a link for that in the comments below in the Facebook group so that people can download that, can find that? It's an incredible book. So
okay, I think I can do that.
Absolute, like it's like a what's the name of something that's like a complete? What's that name of like a piece of work that compendium on meeting the shadow. So please do check that out if this is a topic that's interesting to any of you guys, and please leave your comments below. We can come back and answer those after a replay if you're catching the replay. And thank you so much again, Jeremiah, for coming on and speaking about opening to love. I really do thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. It's been an honor to have you as part of the program. Thank you so much. Yeah.
It's been my pleasure, Ronnie. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank
And
you.
I wish you well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
You too, Jeremiah. Bye,
Be well.
guys. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.